So hello everybody, welcome to the IEP LiveLearnLunch. It is our 67th LiveLearnLunch and we're really excited to be joined today by David from the Good Employability Company, who is going to be taking us through taking risks and doing good in employment services. Who do we help? Who do we harm? Now, who is David? You can see him on the screen. David is one of our IEP fellows and we're really excited to have him joining us today. David's got lots of information to share with us and he's going to be taking us through the presentation. But while he does, please do pop any questions, any comments into chat, because I'm going to be monitoring that and I will be sharing those with David for you and asking any questions and getting the answers you want. So with no further ado, I am going to pass you over to David, who's going to take us through today's session.
Good morning, afternoon even, everyone, and thank you. I can't believe you've got the faith in this presentation to come along and watch it. I'm deliberately going to be rather provocative today, and in my defense you will find in the last slide but one, I think, a list of 20 or 21 references to good quality evidence for everything I'm going to say. But I've deliberately chosen the evidence which makes us look bad. And that's partly because I get fed up with reading websites and promotional material which says everything we do is wonderful, wonderful, aren't we, splendid? When actually it isn't always sunny, it quite often rains in the real world. So if I'm a bit provocative, please feel free to be provoked. Do fight back. Do remind yourselves that not everything is brilliant, but also nearly everything is. What do we do about the things which aren't? Let's go on and start with a medical analogy. To the next slide, please. Now, can it possibly help, or hurt, I should say, can it possibly hurt if we help people towards work? Well, we know that medicine's a good thing, but has anyone ever had the experience of bloodletting? I doubt it. It went out of fashion in probably the early 19th century. Some people might still be using ear candles to effect medical care. I do hope not. Lobotomy was carried out in this, not this, but the last century, and led by eminent physicians who thought they'd got the answer to lots of mental health problems. Pretty disastrous piece of thinking and an even worse piece of experimentation. Now, I know we in our services wouldn't do that kind of thing, would we? We're not like that. We don't just do stuff and hope, or do we? Let's have a look at a prime example from history. On the next one, please. Do you remember, or have you read, that it used to be practice in Great Britain to send unemployed children to Australia, separating them from their families, sending them off to labour camps? That was a policy carried out by people whose aim was to solve the unemployment problem. I don't think we do that anymore, thank heavens, but it was done within living memory. So now, fingers on keyboards, please. How do you know if what you do helps or succeeds? That's the easy one. Extra points for people who can answer. How do you know if anyone you work with is hindered or harmed? We'll take a 30-second pause while your fingers tap away, and Helen can tell me what you think.
Wow, that's a really interesting question, isn't it? It's a challenging one. I think people are going to be typing away to that one. We're here to help, aren't we? And we want to help.
We do, and we're very well motivated, like the lobotomy people.
Yes, and interestingly, while people are typing, there's a book by Bill Bryson, I'm sure you've heard of Bill Bryson, called The Body, and it's absolutely fascinating, and he covers a lot of the medicine we used to do and the harm it did in that book. So if you haven't read that, everyone, I'd really recommend it. And it says understand where they are at before jumping in to help. Help is making their life better, not hitting a target to aid the corporate good.
Great. Fantastic. That's the ethical stance in action, isn't it?
Perfect.
Comes before the corporate good. Fantastic.
And Sylvia says feedback from customers.
Yeah.
Feedback from customers and letting them lead, not just trying to meet targets.
Yeah.
Dahlia said hindered feedback and complaints. That might be one for us to explore.
Yeah.
Dean has said body language and subsequent action or lack of response. Ali has said data and feedback, both after the fact, but lessons get learned and best practice increases as a result.
Fantastic stuff. So there's what we're getting at here already is the necessity of listening to the people that you don't succeed with and treating them as human beings who've got something valuable for you.
Yeah, definitely. Rachel has said follow-up calls and customer feedback helps us to understand what we do well, but they won't necessarily engage with us if we're not doing well. So we really don't know.
Yeah, so it's actually quite difficult to get engaged with the people you don't succeed with. And there's some really good accounts of that in the evidence base about how difficult it is. And it's that Jeanette is saying you need to build trust and rapport. And that absolutely is one of the key ways to staying in touch. I'm going to move on to the next slide now. Because I know what happens, I get caught up with this and we end up talking about one slide instead of all of them. So let's now ask ourselves, if you've got good or even just average or reasonable performance on your project or on your service, what does that actually mean? What it means is that the average includes people who do very well and have good outcomes, but it also includes people who don't do so well and get poor outcomes. So thinking now not about the individuals, about the averages, how do you use the research that's out there, if you do, and it's onerous and time consuming and hard to find, got to recognize that. How do you use the research? Or how do you take your learning from existing practice to move your average further towards the good outcomes? Again, fingers on keyboards.
Again, a really interesting question. With sort of available research, sometimes it's finding the time to see what's out there. It's how do you come across that research, and do we know where to go to access it? Obviously, webinars like this are great because we can find out what's out there.
Yeah. Learning from IEP CPD sessions, I love it.
Oh, well done, Dahlia.
Yeah, extra points for Dahlia. Yeah. Oh. Yes.
It is a challenge. I know it's a challenge for me from the point of view of and keeping up to date with everything that's happening. Just having the time, setting that time aside to find good, reliable research is really challenging.
Yeah. I can see the chat, Helen, I've just spotted it. And I want to say thank you to Tanya for that reading about behavioural science, because there's a lot in behavioural science that we need to think about.
Definitely.
And hello, Tanya, we've emailed ages ago, but nice to, as it were, see you.
Deb said, first, ask those we are helping what they think is good and not what those who run a service consider good.
Yes, we'll come back to that. That's a really important and valuable point.
Jake says we should draw inspiration from what other people have done and in the past and what has been successful.
Yeah. Okay, so there are ways of doing this. They take time, they take effort, and they take attention to other people and listening. So that's good. Let's look at the next slide. Now, here's the thing. Even if you offer a really good quality service, the impact it has is not uniform. It's different for different people. And as an example, we can cite that we know that the confidence of the client is an indicator of how much effort they'll put in and eventually how likely they are to succeed. But oddly enough, people who come to our service already confident might have their confidence undermined. People who are less confident might do better because after all, we're designing our service to help lift them up a bit, but it isn't always so. There are people who are less confident who become even less confident after a helpful service. So we are facing a world in which the harder we try, the steeper the hill we have to climb. It's not easy to get this right. And I don't think there's a magic answer. I should have said that at the beginning. You can't win them all and there's no magic answer. Let's look a bit deeper into this on the next slide, Helen. Some of those good quality services are very carefully provided, very well designed, have high quality, have a lot of quality management behind them, and still they don't produce much effect. And here are two quotations from high quality research by independent academics. One saying, quote, "It's very difficult to detect any lasting effect, and Connections advice in their study had a negligible impact." And in another study of return to work rates for people who are off sick, none of the 3 interventions were successful. And those interventions were given by specialists in the area of sickness, so it's mental health, neurological conditions and physical conditions. And the 3 kinds of interventions actually did not improve return to work. So, ouch, it's not enough to be very careful and very thorough about what you're doing. Let's go on a bit more. It gets worse. As well as some services, not all, but some services having a minimal effect, some people actually suffer as a result of the service. So the likelihood of return to work was reduced for people with mental health problems in my previous example. And in another example, it was impossible, difficult to know who would have got work if they hadn't been helped. And in a third example, this one, I think from the prison service employability support a few years ago, providing training to people. You know, you learn to use a computer, you go and get a qualification as a bricklayer, it's great. If there's not a serious prospect of a job at the end of it, that person may be less likely to be employed than if you hadn't sent them on the training. So for some people, what we're doing is actively harmful. So let's go on again. Let's think about what might be happening. Remember that I use mights and oughts and shoulds and don't knows an awful lot because they're the right things. Let's look at sickness. This data taken from a study in Liverpool a couple of years ago, quite a few years ago, about 5 years ago now, and nearly 5,000 people had a sick note that lasted at least a month, but an almost vanishingly small proportion of those people were given 12-month sick notes, and that was counting, repeated sick notes as continuous. Now, that's a very, very interesting finding for us because it tells us that if we think we're going to help people sooner, we may well end up at the 1, 2, 3 month stage, helping people who were going to get better and go back to work anyway. And if we offer help, that help may hinder, or at least slow down their return to work. On the other hand, the people who are off work for 12 months or longer accumulate, don't they? And if we can pick up those individuals, we know we've probably got the right client group, which I guess is what most of us try to do. Let's look at the number of people who get work after at least a year of unemployment. And here's a time scale from 1986 to 2012, which is the last statistic I can find reliably. We find that people who've been unemployed between 1 and 2 years get back to work at the rate of at least 70%, but often 90%. If you've been unemployed for over 5 years, as many as 60% will go back to work unaided, and as few as 30% will go back to work. And the difference between the 30 and the 60 is not the service provision, it is the economy. And you can see that very clearly in the graphs, and they're different colors for different durations. But even if you choose people who've been out of work for quite a long time, something like 30 to 60% of them are going to go back to work, whether you help them or not. Doesn't mean it's a bad thing to help. It just means we're in risk territory. Okay. Let's have a look at the next one there, Helen. So what's going on? And these are, again, just some examples. I really would, if you're the kind of person who likes reading and thinking and kind of trying to work it out for yourself, please, by all means, go and look at the references I've provided at the end. Most of them can be dug out on the internet, not all, but I'm very happy to share more information, really happy to do that. So here are some examples from that evidence. We all know, don't we, that it's about barriers to work. No, childcare, it's about my dog's off sick, it's about there are no buses that get to the place where I know the work is, it's about all of those barriers to work. And yet there's some quite interesting work done by occupational psychologists suggesting that if you use barriers as the focus of your interaction, you can emphasize them and make them worse. And in a sense, the client comes in with a problem and they go out with a barrier. So there's something very subtle there about how you address these barriers without turning them into problems or without making them more difficult. And that's clearly around the subtlety of the interaction between the individual and the client who's talking about their problems. There are, in addition, quite a number of examples where the environment is hostile to success. And I've quoted prisons because it seems almost obvious as an example, but it is far from the only one. The prison service, in one report, almost actively put hurdles in the way of an employment advice service. Not least of which was moving prisoners from place to place so they couldn't get a continuous service, which is enough to destroy the working relationship and the confidence and the effectiveness of what people are trying to do. So we need to look not just at how we work as individuals with our clients, we need to look also very closely at what's happening in the environment. Let's go on one more. Couple more examples and then some questions for you. If you use diagnostic tools, and quite a lot of people do, and mostly they think they're pretty useful, and there are lots of them, you can actually alienate your clients. Diagnostic tools are probably useful for a certain kind of client who welcomes that way of thinking about things. But there's an example, again, from the prison service, where giving people numeracy and literacy tests presented challenges and threats and made people realize how incompetent they were and actually damaged their confidence for getting a job. Another example from my own experience was of a nurse who told a client who had some difficulty going back to work that he couldn't be a driver because he was illiterate. She diagnosed illiteracy. When I met him, God bless him, he laughed about it and said, of course I'm not illiterate, I can read road signs as well as anybody. So you need to be a bit careful about diagnosis. And you also need to be a bit careful about the impact you think your service is having, because there's some pretty good evidence out there that clients value things differently from the way advisors do, and also from the way managers do. So those of you who've already been thinking, yeah, okay, let's talk to clients, you're really onto something important here. So questions, fingers on buzzers, teams. Have you met any of these, or can you think of any examples of harm of your own? Not that you did, I know you wouldn't do harm at all, but the kind of things we've been talking about.
Okay, so we'll just see what comes in. Some good food for thought there. Roger has commented that personality tests are used as a diagnostic tool. I know we've mentioned these before on sessions, haven't we, when we've looked at sort of personality assessments and how these land.
Yeah, personality tests are quite commonplace, and they're first of all, they are extremely difficult to design. And they are, if they're not very, very, very well designed and validated with the specific client group you're working with, they're pretty awful, actually.
Yeah, and there's always the challenge as well, and I always refer to them as assessments rather than tests, because with a test I always think you can pass and fail. And there's always the danger, isn't there, of if someone feels they've failed that test, that they'll feel there's something wrong with them, when actually it's just maybe their personality isn't suited to a certain type of role for a certain reason, rather than it being a sort of any sort of failure. Deborah said, yes, adult diagnosis of autism, and they start to attribute everything to the label without a true understanding. People also start to believe they can only learn in one way, that they will never be able to think differently.
Yes.
People suffer from low confidence, are often less confident in dismissing the labels.
Very good point, that the very people who most need your close and loving, if I can use that word, attention, have their readiness to self-assess and their abilities actually hindered. Yeah.
Sylvia says people conforming to programs which do not necessarily meet their needs.
Yes, yeah, you've got to conform. Maybe you've been told to conform by the welfare people, or maybe you just feel that you ought to, and that it's bound to work. Great.
And Rachel has said that she specialises in health and well-being as a barrier to employment, and two things she has noticed is that diagnostic tools are not helpful to people with neurodiverse conditions, and that addressing barriers can make them worse.
Yes, I think that's...
And then Etheline has also shared that disability-friendly employers who change a disability-aware manager for one without a sensitivity to the fact that employees need his or her reasonable adjustments to continue in the job.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not at all.
Remind me of a circumstance where I was working in a disability organisation many years ago, and they were so confident of their brilliance at the work they did. They said, we tell the clients to leave their disability at the door. And I thought, oh, you know, that's going to work really well for about one person in 10.
Yeah.
Yeah, look at them. So this, it seems from your comments, and thank you very much for these, it seems as though this is actually much more like familiar territory than I thought it would be. So then, is anyone finding that what we're talking about is problematic?
It seems very positive. People seem to be joining in on the chat, so I haven't seen anyone challenge anything yet, David.
So I got my apologies in first, you see.
Well, this is it, isn't it? And because you're so lovely, nobody wants to. But honestly, we can, everybody. If there's anything you want to challenge,
yeah,
someone who's debated with David before, I can assure you he loves it. So he will say thing, not a criticism of any type.
Yeah. I really really do appreciate the responses here. They just show that we're all alert to what could go wrong, what could go right, and the dangers that we're in. Let's have a look at another slide there. So now the question, we've established that we do fail, and we can't help it, we just do. What happens to those whom we fail? And is it harmless if somebody does not get a job? What's this from Deb?
Deb saying more people are answering that question. She delivered some sessions for a very large mental health charity and was told that the group had struggled with employability information. The session had taken place previously where it was death by flip chart. So she took a different approach, did mind mapping, worked on images of work, and the dynamic of the group changed. Too much focus on the yesterdays of a situation. So just taking different approaches and responding to the needs of a group is so important, isn't it? Picking up on those cues.
Can I ask, Deb, is when you said the group had struggled with employability, was that a group of staff or a group of clients?
We will see what she says. A group of adults with severe learning disabilities.
Wow. Wow. So somebody was using flip charts on people with severe learning disabilities.
And possibly doing a lot of talking, I would imagine, as they did. Yeah, it's disappointing, isn't it? But from a good place, I'm sure they weren't there, not wanting to help. So Sylvia has said teeth back in, Helen. The revolving door syndrome. Worked on lots of different programs and seen the same customers returning.
Yes.
Often those who we fail end up back on the system to be bounced into another provision. This can be really damaging to their self-esteem and confidence. So similar experience there to Sylvia. Ali's asked a question here for you, David. I'm curious about the use of success and fail. It implies gaining new employment is the only positive outcome for a client, which isn't always the case.
Ali, you're absolutely spot on. Quite right. You've spotted my weakness, which is having spent too many decades working in programs that were really aiming for employment as an outcome. Completely right, and thank you for pointing that out. There is, and it's not in the list, but there is some really good work being done about distance travelled, about the alternative benefits of good advice and guidance in employability fields. And you've put your finger on one of the key answers to how do we cope with failure to get someone a job. Maybe we're not aiming for a job. Maybe we should be helping the client to make other gains and benefits.
Definitely. And Deb's agreeing with the revolving door analogy, saying we call it yo-yoing. Too much money's being thrown at employment and not enough at dealing with the issues that have led to unemployment and disengagement with society generally.
Yeah. So if we have strict outcome measures, it can be part of. Remember, we earlier on said the institution can be hostile to success. And maybe having measures that are too strict or too narrow contributes to that hostility.
Mm. Okay. I think that's all the comments we've got at the moment.
Well, I see one from Etheline and from Sylvia.
Okay, so Etheline, my students make all their own little steps and progress on their own challenges. Which is great for building self-esteem, isn't it? That having those smaller goals that we can work towards. Sylvia says, thankfully, where I work, we measure soft skills as an outcome. And Janetta said, should we be managing expectations more and aspirations less, with a question mark? So over to you on that one, David, your thought.
I'm not sure what the question means. If you
Or maybe we could ask Jeanette to pop a little bit more.
Yeah, if you want to pop a bit more in the chat box, Jeanette. Managing expectations more and aspirations less. Yeah, I need to think about that one, and please help. While you're doing that, should we move on to the next one?
Yeah, let's.
So just a few of the things, and I get the feeling this is going to be all very familiar to you all. Some of the things we can avoid doing is cherry picking people we think are easy to help. And that's actually harder to do, but when it's done alongside the practice called parking, I'm sure everyone knows what I mean.
Yes.
Yeah. If you park the people that are not making progress and to help the ones who are getting along quickly, that ain't doing any good for the people you park. We've measured the use of tests or profiling or personal systems. I'm thinking now of things like the careers mapping and job similarity testing, job matching tests. Those can be inappropriate. I'll give you a quick example, actually. Guy I worked with who'd been a drain layer, brilliant, creative man, fabulous, had a car accident. He went to an advisor who found him a job being a car park attendant, which he turned down, and she found it using some personality test. And he said to me, I'll tell you what, my friends would never speak to me again if I became a car park attendant. And that's what the test had done for him. So not good in that case.
Not good, but I'd also challenge around his friends. They're not very good friends if they judge you on what you did for a living, are they?
Well, if I could choose my friends as well as you can, Helena.
Oh dear.
Yeah. Non-validated technologies. There's not only personality tests, but if you want to have some fun, go online and pick a careers guidance online test, preferably one of the interactive ones. Do it and record the outcome, but record how it related to you. And then ask a few questions like, if you saw someone doing that with a person doing that with a client, would you regard that as a good interview? Could a blind person use that? Could a person without a computer use that? There's a lot of technology out there which needs to be used with a human advisor, or not at all.
Yeah.
Or only with very expert clients. And of course, the expert clients tend to be those who don't need it.
Yeah, interestingly, I think during the last digital technology conference that we did all the way back in September now, during our mental health sessions, we looked at some of the apps that were available around supporting mental health, and the shocking number of ones that didn't have any scientific background. They were web designers rather than mental health specialists.
Absolutely spot on, Helen. Yes.
Yeah, really, really worrying. And we looked at ways to make sure you can validate the apps you use, like going to the NHS and seeing who they recommend and that kind of thing. But yeah, it's there's so much out there, isn't there? And it's just making sure it's safe to use or being used in the correct way.
I could see Jeanette's put the answer up, but
She
hold on to that
has.
answer for a second.
I was gonna hold that till you'd finish this slide and then
Yeah, because I think it's a really important question. Incentives, lots of you have already mentioned incentives. Effectively, you're pressured or demands are put on you to achieve certain goals, and they make it very difficult for you to have the right kind of relationship with your clients. So the way management address these questions that we're talking about today is very important. Management needs to understand and to participate in the solutions, not just to be the slave driver on the back deck with a whip, which I think is cruel of me to talk about managers like that, but it is an important point. So what does Jeanette say? Do you want to read that one out, Helen?
I will, definitely. So Jeanette said, when we have customers who want to be a doctor, as an example, and this is not really achievable for them on the face of it. So it seems it's not achievable. Should we be steering them away from this or work with them to possibly fail?
Right. So the question is, the client has a clear goal. Because of your specialist knowledge, you think it is a too distant or difficult goal at the moment. You don't want to disenchant them and make them feel bad or discourage them, because even having a goal is a great step forward. So what do? We do reality checking. Well, that's what I call it. Other people have probably got different names for it. We go through a process with the client of having them discover what's involved and decide what they can do, what's achievable, what's not yet, what's probably not me after all. And that's such a vital part of the work of an advisor, isn't it? It is the self-discovery and discovery of the labour market. I don't know if I've answered your point there, but
it's that balance, isn't it? It's the balance between keeping motivation and engagement up, but also that reality testing, isn't it? That
reality testing, but that's a very glib phrase for a quite subtle and intricate,
difficult thing to do. Yeah, definitely. And I know, we need to look more at how do we do that in a way that's motivating for people, and it allows them to explore all the positives and the skills that they have and how they can be utilised.
Absolutely. Thank you.
We've had a bit of a fun one here from Deb before we move on. Sorry, David. Having recently completed one of the online career packages recommended by HMGov, I am not sure that those that designed them had much, if any, real understanding of how skills relate to a career area. We did laugh at the results and think they were on a par with a Facebook mining quiz. Oh, Deb, you're going to have to put in chat which one you did now. I have to know. I think I want to go myself and see what it comes back with.
Oh, wonderful. Yes. But Alice is a very interesting response.
It is. So we offer backwards career planning, taking that end goal and working backwards to create an action plan to get there. Then review with the client if it is realistic to continue aiming for or to look for alternatives, empowering the client to make the choice for them and not our advisors telling them. And similar to the reality check. Yeah, definitely. Lovely way of doing it. And it's so powerful if you arrive at a decision yourself, isn't it, rather than someone telling you it's not realistic.
It's central, really.
Okay, so if Rachel says, if you have clients who either don't know what they want to do or say they would like to do any job, I would argue that you could use technology-based career suggestions to help open up the conversation and begin reality checking. So there is a place for that, but I think that goes back to what you say, David, isn't it? It's great if it's done with an advisor, with another human, to
Yes,
make sure it's helping, not.
absolutely. It's and someone like Rachel who speaks like this is clearly the person who should be guiding through technology-based career suggestions and helping the clients laugh when they're silly and take them seriously when they're helpful. Absolutely right. Now, one question here: how does your organization gather data to avoid harm and maximize benefits? While you're typing the answers to that, because I can imagine it's pretty tough for any organization to do that, let's look at the next slide.
Wow.
Now, because part of the answer is that there needs to be a powerful feedback loop. And it is necessary, I think, for organizations to study both the failures and the successes. The successes tell us something important, not just about how great we are, but about how they manage to overcome their barriers, if that's the issue, or how their confidence helped them face the competition of work. And the failures may help us understand more, not just about ourselves and the local labour market, but also about the social and cultural circumstances that people live in. There is so much to study here. And if we can do that, and this is where it gets a bit technical, using objective measures, and not just did they get a job, but what was the level of their confidence, what was their skill level, how accurate was their perception of the job possibilities, and so forth. And if we can do that also using people who've not been through the same service, so that we've got a baseline comparison. And as people were saying earlier on, and it's so true, listening to the clients and listening to the staff who are on the front line, you can get a feedback loop that creates the right environment for avoiding harm. And that feedback loop is difficult to do, requires energy and time, and probably is not something you get right first time you try it. Let's go on. How's the time? 1:45. Feel free.
We've had before we launch into this one, we've had a question come in from Dahlia, David. She's, what scholarly articles would you recommend for ideas about what works with people who face barriers to employment?
Oh gosh, quite a few of them. Some of them are in the references at the end, and I'll try and highlight them if we get there in time. Dahlia, I could answer you better, and anyone else who's interested, if you email me, and then I can go to my database and pick them out. I'm really bad at holding things like that ready in my head, but there are a few around.
So what you can do, everyone, is if you want to drop us an email, we can send that out to everybody. If you'd like to, drop me an email, or David, his email address will be up at the end, and we'll get them out to you. But I'll pop my email in the chat right now, and we can get that sorted for everyone.
Okay. So how do we go forward from here? It's enough of me being an old curmudgeon. I do enjoy it, so thank you for listening so far. Not running away. The quote is that from an eminent researcher that we begin to analyze data for clinical significance, and clinical significance in this context means, is it good enough to give to everybody, or are the side effects so bad that you wouldn't want to release it on the public? And I think I'm probably saying something that will ring bells and not be too controversial with you all when I say that you need to make ethical choices. That if someone doesn't want what you're offering, they should be allowed not to have it, and they should be helped to find the thing they do want. And that's a very simple example. And the ethical choices include how you run the service and how you do your frontline work, as well as how you manage. And that has to be underpinned by active monitoring and analysis. And I don't mean, oh, well, we've got the stats on our outcomes for this month. I mean, sitting down with objective and independent thought and with detailed work on what actually happens, how it happens, who does what, why and when and where, to try and find out the active ingredients of success. And some of those active ingredients are about being aware of the problems, about the whole organization being involved, and for there being ways for staff and clients to raise any issues that come up. And people have already said that, but it's interesting, we're agreeing on this. I wonder how much it actually happens. I'm not sure. I'm no longer a service provider.
So we have a comment from Dahlia who says, a thought, it can help to approach people with an expectation that they definitely want to improve their lives in some way. For example, some may be motivated to be a better parent. The challenge for us is to gain understanding from them about what they want to improve in their lives, then to enable them to see how employment may be able to help them achieve their goal.
Quite right. Absolutely. So it's a holistic, I've used that word, I hate it so much, but I've used it now, so too late. It's a holistic approach. The whole person and their whole situation needs to be in the frame.
Definitely, and there's so much more that you get from employment than just that paycheck, isn't there, from the job you do.
Let's go on to the next one.
Deb said, while I'm moving that on for you, Deb has said, if you asked me what would work, scrap programs and focus on the person in front of you. Look at where they are on the ladder and then work on whether they can climb it, how many rungs, so what, when, how, and not set a time, but set a destination. Too much fitting round peeps into square program holes. Really nicely put.
Round people into square programs. Oh dear, the story of my life. That's really I want to say that I've said several times that getting good quality evidence from your data and from your clients is difficult and time consuming, blah, blah, blah. But I want to say it can be done. And I've got a reference here because me and my very good colleague David Booth actually went out and did it, and we measured client scores about work, about the quality of their life, in a randomized and controlled test. And we did it across 5 countries, I think five countries across 6 months, and that graph summarizes the results, which showed us clearly, and they're statistically reliable, that the advisors who'd had training had better outcomes with their clients than the advisors who'd not had training. So that kind of says, good, that's a first step to what kind of training works. Now we're ready to get into the detail. So you can do it. There are models out there that you can adopt, which help you find out whether your outcomes have clinical significance. Quality factors that we think from the evidence look right are, as people have said it already in the chat box, thank you, attention to individual circumstances, your own skills, feedback from all of your clients, and then you get the opportunity to measure the differential distribution. So remember that normal curve with clients doing well at one end and not so well at the other. That's what you're trying to find out. You can measure your impacts compared to what if we didn't do anything? Would anyone notice? Would it matter? Are we living on dead weight? And what are our working practices? Those are the sorts of measures that we're looking for. And I guess trying to be a bit more positive, I'm here to say, well, it's not easy, it takes time and effort, but it can be done.
Excellent, thank you.
Next one, let's see.
Here's that slide that I said.
Here's that slide. Well, I'll mention a couple of these, and then we'll be able to get back to the afternoon, which would be great for you, and shame for me. I want to say thank you already for all your lovely comments. They're really helpful. Roger Chapman, who's with us, hello Roger, has been leading a review of the matrix standard and has incorporated some of the thinking that I've been borrowing here into the new standard. Roger, I don't know if you want to put anything in the chat box about how people can get involved. And some of these references, or these references, are some of those which have also been used in that review. So we wanted to look at, if you want to look at how programs can be hostile to success, number 16 is pretty good. If you want to get an inside view of why barriers can be a problem, number 10 is pretty good. Number 4 is a very good review of the evidence and the impact of that evidence on employment advice interviews. I'm not sure how easy that is to find, but I've got a copy, and I know that David Booth would be cheerful for it to be circulated. Where are we? Anyway, I could end up talking about these all afternoon. Anyway, any more comments there, Helen?
We have had some more comments, so let me just pop back. I know we had one from Jeanette, so let me just have a look for that. Jeanette says there is a tension between immediate needs and pressures and aspirations, and we have to try and work with the resources we have and what is available. Sadly, I am seeing the dwindling resources and an increase of outcome funded programs that puts pressure on both the service providers and the service users. Which is just, yeah. Deb has said, feedback and outcomes. A customer this morning thanking me for all my help. She got the job we've been focusing on with a local authority, permanent school hour role, and fits in with her childcare. No amount of stats replicate the joy in her voice and Deb's smile when she got the news. Job done, and that's why she does what she does. Well done, Deb.
Well done, Deb, and I know you'll agree. I find that circumstance you've just described completely addictive. It's what keeps you going, isn't it?
It really is. I remember going into an office and an advisor asking me to run a mock interview for someone who was stuck on their caseload, and did it and gave some really good, really challenging developmental feedback to the customer. And the next time I popped through that office, because I was in a national role, it was about a month or so later, and was greeted with a thank you card from that person because they'd feedback on board, and they'd actually sent me a little card as well. And it was really, really lovely. I've missed the chocolates, but I got the card, and that was enough for me. It's really lovely.
Isn't that lovely?
But yeah, the moral of that story is pop into offices more often to get there when the chocolates and the goodies are still there, I think. But no, it really did make my day, because it was just something that I'd done in isolation, and for them to actually remember, and it shows the impact that we have. Rod has said, if you would like to find out more about the Matrix Standard for information, advice and guidance, please contact me, roger.chapman@growthco.uk. So yes, all of you, if you do want to receive that information, do please contact Roger, who is happy to send you some information out. And Darlene
Let me put in a
stories
very
like
quick
this.
plug for the Matrix Standard and for Roger's work on it. It's really worth getting involved, and for your organisation to be part of it. No. Oh, Ali's. I see Ali's.
Yeah,
got
Ali needs to leave. I've picked up a message, but Ali, we don't normally send the slides out, but we do share all of the recordings on the YouTube channel. And if it's particularly the research you're interested in, I think me and David will pull those, maybe one of those slides together and send it out to everyone, because I think everyone's saying they're interested in that research and being able to list it. So brilliant. I can see you've got that. Darlie is saying stories like the stories we've been sharing are so encouraging. I wonder if maybe at some point we should do just a members session where we come together and share some of these stories while we have a cup of tea and you know, just chat about what's going on out there, because it does help motivate us. We talk about engaging customers all of the time, but we don't always worry about engaging ourselves and keeping our own motivation levels up, do we? So some food for thought there. She's also asked, is there much research on the social value of the work we do, David?
There is lots of it, and I've got a stack of references. It's awfully hard to dig out, but if you're up for the effort, I can certainly point you in some directions. But I see the time. I see.
We're nearly out of time. It's just been mentioned that you
Step on to the next slide for me.
Yeah, just before we do, David, it's been mentioned that you bear a striking resemblance to Michael Palin.
I did get away. I wish I had been some.
Rachel says she could listen to you all day, so they're all just trying to charm you now, David. So the slide says that you are coming back.
I love it. Well, you've got another chance to listen to me rabbiting on and being a curmudgeonly old whatnot. 7th of July, I think, is it, Helen?
It is the 7th of July at the same time, 12 p.m.
Yeah, garbage in, garbage out. Some interventions I've met, do they work? Boy, am I going to have fun with that.
So Janetta said, thank you for a really stimulating session. Rachel said, thank you, really interested, could listen to you all day.
Oh.
Deb says, thank you, interesting session, and we need to challenge thinking more and have that disruptive thinking to stir the pot. Yvonne says, thank you, enjoyed this so much. Andrea says, thank you for another interesting and thoughtful session. Sharon says, I have been a curriculum specialist for 18 years and have now moved into a coaching manager role. This session has been invaluable. I'm looking forward to transferring these skills to help participants. What about that for a comment, Dave? Going to check up this afternoon.
Am I in colour? Because you should see the blood.
You are, and we can.
Oh dear.
Susan says,
I'm
thank
very
you
grateful
for the
to your
session.
time and your
And Jay, lots of them coming in. Now, I'd just like to say at this point, before you say your goodbyes, there have been so many comments on the chat today that we haven't managed to read them all. But thank you all. They've been fantastic, and I know everyone will have been reading them. So apologies to those who didn't get all of their comments read out, but thank you very much for making those comments. Because the question is what it is, because that everybody's joining in.
And my huge thank you to you all for being so positive and creative and joining in and making it so much easier for Helen and me. Fabulous to meet you all. Really look forward to seeing you again if we can.
In July, yeah, definitely. So get over and I think in the Learning Network we have all of those links out. So do get yourself booked in nice and early for those Zoom sessions. Everybody, I can see lots of thank yous coming in. Thank you, David, again for another wonderful session. Really enjoyed it. Looking forward to next week. So we've got a different session on next week. We're joined by Big Dog, Little Dog and another of our fellows, Kevin, who is going to be looking at mental health for us. So if you haven't already, pop over to the YouTube channel and do click subscribe, because it means if you do miss any of these sessions, you'll automatically receive them. And every Wednesday we have our e-bulletin that goes out called the Learning Network, and that always has links to usually the next 6 or 7 live learn lunches on there. So do have a look at that and just, you know, register for whichever ones you can, and you will receive a copy of the recording as well. So thank you very much. Enjoy your afternoons, everybody. Thank you again, David. I will see you before the 7th, but we will all see you as a group on the 7th.
Look forward to meeting you all again. Thank you so much for being here.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I can see some people. I'm going to wave to those that have been brave and put their cameras on. Jeanette, thank you for lots of really great contributions today.